Welcome to this week's narrated PowerPoint presentation. This week I'll be taking you through the restoration of what I believe is a true Italian masterpiece, a beautiful lantern clock made in 1740 by a gentleman by the name of Lorenzo Riviera. Although clockmaking in Italy never really made it into the mainstream production like Germany and France and England and other countries, clockmaking really does, I believe, go right back to the early 1200s in Italy. The first clocks, of course, weren't really clocks at all. They were more alarms and were developed in the monasteries, and they rang bells rather than showed the time on a dial. Also, the hours on an Italian clock weren't necessarily 1 to 12. Some clocks have 1 to 6, as I've showed you earlier in my presentations. But this clock still retains the Italian hours, and it strikes 1 to 6 4 times a day. It also repeats a few minutes after the hour, so that if you missed it the first time, hopefully you'll get it the second time. So here is a picture of the clock that I purchased. It's beautifully executed, but in this particular photo it shows you it was in a rather sad condition. The condition becomes more obvious when we get further around into the movement. With a clock of this quality, it really deserves to be in a museum, but not hidden away in an archive on display. And back in 2002, I found a picture of this clock when it actually was in a museum and photographed as part of that collection. And at that time, it still had its original hand. But note, they've also got it turned so that you can't see one of the missing finials at the back. Nevertheless, the quality was then appreciated, but after that something went wrong and it finally came back onto the market. It's always a joy to find a lantern clock with the maker's name engraved on the dial, and here we can see it, Lorenzo Riviera, and the fesse below, which is Latin for he made it. And the Italians always speak about their clocks in the third person, not as in England where it says fecit, I made it. This is fesse, he made it. He was making clocks in 1740 and thereabouts, because there is a reference in an Italian clockmaker's reference book, and he's found there having made a single-handed clock relevant to central Italy. Turn the clock around and the problems become obvious. On the left-hand side, you can see the striking train is missing the fly. This is the governor which controls the speed of the strike. On the right-hand side, in the time train, there is one wheel missing, the first wheel, and above the contrate wheel, the crown wheel or escape wheel is missing, its relevant pinion, and also above that, on the top of the plate, would be the verge escapement, all gone. Looking at the rear of the clock, and also down onto the top of the clock, we can see more of the missing parts. The finial missing at the back corner, and as I said before, the crown wheel or the escape wheel, the verge pallets and the pendulum, which should come across the top of that plate and hang down behind the rear of the clock. Here's evidence of the quality of the workmanship. The steel detents and lifting arms within the movement are beautifully engraved and shaped. Why? They're out of view, never seen, but the clockmaker has pride in workmanship. The engraving is consistent with that seen on the steel work of pistols, and here's an Italian pistol typical of the period. So begins the cleanup and restoration of this beautiful clock. A replacement finial has been made in exactly the same style, using brass consistent with the age of the clock. The life of a lantern clock includes dismantling, cleaning, repair over the centuries, and naturally things go missing. In most cases, screws and nuts have been replaced with something more modern. And in this case, one of the screws was missing from the back cock of the escapement. Typically, they were knight's head screws, and here I've made a replica and blued it and fitted it to hold the cock in place as it would have been originally. The only way to clean and repair and straighten up these old frames is to completely dismantle them. And here you can see the frame has been completely dismantled, cleaned, straightened, and rebuilt back to original condition, ready now for the wheelwork to begin. So, as I mentioned before, the fly was missing, so here is a new fly made in exactly the same way as they were made at this time. There's the crown wheel over on the left, cut in exactly the same shape and style as the original. And below you can see I'm making the first wheel, and again I'm using old brass and cutting it out to the appropriate wheel count to give me the pendulum length that I require for this particular clock. Having made the vital components and fitted them back into the movement, here's the assembled clock now, fully operational, as it would have been when first made. Here's a short list of some of the key features of this particular clock, and I'll leave you to read those at your leisure. When I first saw this clock, I couldn't understand why there was a hole in the dial at 6. Being weight driven, there was no reason for a key to be actually winding anything up. But in fact, having seen the clock close hand, the key actually fits onto a square of the great wheel and is able then to mesh with the single hour hand wheel and allow for hand setting. Quite unique. I've not seen it on any other clock but an Italian lantern clock. This clock has ribotta, which means repeating, and since it is a 1 to 6 striker and repeating the strike after a few minutes of the first, you can see here on the count wheel how it is made to do 2 strikes of each of the hourly numbers. 2 notches for 1, 2 notches for 2, 2 notches for 3, 2 notches for 4, etc. all the way up to 2 lots of 6. These clocks have no warning system on the strike. As soon as the lifting lever reaches a certain height, the striking train runs. These clocks have what's called a nag's head, and you can see on the left it's a lever with a flexible tip. So as soon as it flips over one pin, the head immediately drops back behind that pin, ready for the next strike, because it's only a few minutes away and it has to be ready quickly. Fortunately, I had found that photo of the clock from 2002 when it had its original hand in place. It had gone missing, so I was able to use that original design to make something similar, and for that I used an old tyre lever, which don't get much use anymore. And here you can see I've fretted it out, then fettled it, and finally blued it and fitted it to the front of the clock. At a distance, it's difficult to appreciate the quality of the workmanship in the dial, the hand engraving and the detail that went into decorating these beautiful pieces. Around the top of the dial, there's a grotesque mask in the center. There's dragons breathing fire. In the bottom, there's more devils, possibly blowing flame in amongst all of the foliate design. You'll also note that there's a keyhole there for that key for adjusting the hands at 6. It's not uncommon in any clock with a painted or engraved dial to find that the engraver has drawn from the scenery and the location of where the clock was made. In this case, we can see in the center of the dial a rural scene, a small church, a hill town, and the sun beaming down brightly, typical of would be found in a place like Tuscany in central Italy. There were no weights when I bought this clock, but having completed the time and strike trains, I was able to operate those trains until I found the optimum weight to drive them. I converted that weight into lead, which I melted and poured into wooden moulds. Wooden moulds are fine for a one-off pouring, maybe even 2 to 4 before the box was burnt too badly, but they work fine. Unlike other countries that produced lantern clocks, Italian clocks were never made to hang directly on the wall with a hook. All of them have to have some form of bracket. And on the left here is an original Rococo style bracket with an Italian lantern clock, not dissimilar to mine. As you can see, it also has a hole at 6 for adjusting the hands. I replicated that design and made my own mahogany bracket as shown on the left. I'm sure you will agree that fully restored, this clock really does have the appearance of a masterpiece, a beautiful Italian clock restored. Thanks for watching this presentation. I hope you can appreciate the quality of these Italian lantern clocks. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make, you can send me an email on the address shown below on this page. Thank you for watching. Keep safe. Bye for now.